There are moments in life that feel like the ground beneath your feet suddenly gives way. A phone call, a betrayal, a truth you weren't ready to hear. And in a split second, everything changes. You feel hollow, dizzy, almost outside of yourself. That's not just stress. That's not just pain. That's emotional shock. It doesn't just hurt. It dismantles. It pulls the floor out from your sense of who you are, what you know, and what you trust. Carl Jung understood these moments as more than psychological events. He saw them as ruptures in the soul, times when the unconscious floods into consciousness, and we are forced to face parts of ourselves we never knew existed. In his words, emotion is the chief source of consciousness. There is no change from darkness to light, or from inertia to movement, without emotion. Emotional shock, then, is not just a crisis. It is the moment before transformation. You may not recognize it for what it is. All you feel is the collapse, the numbness, the overwhelming sense that life has spun out of control. But underneath that, something ancient is stirring, something raw and real. Jung believed these breakdowns are not the end of us. They are invitations into deeper wholeness, but only if we are willing to walk through them with open eyes. Let's begin. Emotional shock doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it happens in silence, when the person you loved walks away, when the job you gave your soul to lets you go, when life stops making sense in the way it used to. You find yourself unable to cry, unable to think, unable to feel. Just blank, just still. Jung would say that in these moments, the ego, the small self we've carefully constructed, is overwhelmed. Emotional shock penetrates the defenses we've built around our identity. It touches the unconscious, and that is why it feels so destabilizing. It's not just a reaction to an event. It's the shaking loose of everything you used to believe about yourself. When we experience emotional shock, it often activates what Jung called complexes, emotional clusters tied to past wounds. These complexes have lives of their own. They can take over. And when the shock hits, those buried emotions erupt without our consent. You may not understand why you're reacting so strongly, but your unconscious does. Something old has been awakened. This is not weakness. It is the psyche calling attention to something long neglected. And while it may feel like you're unraveling, what's actually happening is deeper than that. The soul is speaking. We all have a face we show the world, a version of ourselves that smiles when we're hurting, stays calm when we're overwhelmed, and holds everything together so that no one else has to. that version isn't fake. It's functional. It's the part of us that adapts, that keeps us safe, that knows how to be accepted. Jung called it the persona. It's the social mask we wear, not just to hide, but to survive. And yet, the persona is not the truth of who we are. It's a role, a necessary one, but still a role. The problem comes when we forget that, when we start believing the mask is our identity, when we build our worth around being the strong one, the successful one, the helpful one. And then one day, life hands us something we can't perform our way through. Something too big, too real, too raw. That's what emotional shock does. It cracks the persona open. It strips away everything you thought made you you. The job title, the relationship, the emotional armor. Gone. And suddenly, you're standing there exposed, not just to the world, but to yourself. Jung saw this moment as both terrifying and necessary, because as painful as it is to lose the image, it's often the only way we come home to the self. He once said, "The persona is a system of behavior which is imposed upon the individual by the environment and by his own choice of adaptation. But it is only a mask, and beneath that mask is the authentic self. When the persona cracks, the world you've known may fall with it. Friends may pull away, confused by your change. Colleagues may not know how to relate to you anymore. Even you might not recognize yourself in the mirror. You may feel like you're falling apart, but Jung would say you're falling inward, towards something more real. This is the moment many people panic. They try to patch the mask back together, to pretend they're fine, to put the costume back on and keep performing. But once the shock comes, something deep inside refuses to go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you now know. And pretending only makes the ache worse. You may find yourself feeling raw, irritable, exhausted. The voice in your head might ask, "What's wrong with me?" But the better question is, what's finally coming to the surface? Emotional shock doesn't create a crisis of identity. It reveals that there was already one waiting to be seen. Sometimes, the identity we built was never really ours. It was handed to us. We became the caretaker because that's what the family needed. We became the achiever because that's where the praise lived. We became the peacemaker, the performer, the perfectionist, because somewhere along the line, we thought being our true self wasn't safe. So we built a version of ourselves we thought the world would love. And for a while, it worked. Until it didn't. shock disrupts that illusion. It forces us to ask, who am I when I'm no longer who I thought I had to be? And the answer to that question is rarely clear at first. There is a period of disorientation, a liminal space where the old self is gone and the new self hasn't fully arrived. Jung described this as a death of the false identity, a psychological crucifixion of the ego. But here's the thing. The cracking of the persona doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It pulls back the curtain. It makes space for something more genuine to emerge, something you didn't have access to before. Your vulnerability, your truth, your voice, your real needs. These aren't flaws. They're parts of you that were hidden under layers of performance. And what begins to grow in the place of the persona is not another role. It's presence. It's rootedness. It's the quiet but unshakable awareness that you are enough as you are, not because of how you perform, but because of your being. The breaking is brutal, but the becoming is beautiful. So if your old mask has started to slip, if the person you used to be no longer fits, let that be okay. Let the unraveling happen. Let the silence in. Because what's emerging isn't weakness. It's truth. And even if it doesn't feel like it now, one day you'll look back and realize that was the moment you finally began to live from your soul. There are wounds that bleed, and there are wounds that don't. The second kind, the silent ones, are often the most dangerous. They don't leave scars on the skin. They live in the nervous system, in the soul, in the deep recesses of the unconscious mind. Carl Jung believed that many of our emotional shocks leave behind invisible wounds, not because they're insignificant, but because they are too big to fully process when they happen. So we bury them. We go on with life. We tell ourselves we're fine. We get back to work. We smile through the pain. But something changes. Quietly, beneath the surface. Something inside us is never quite the same. Maybe you stop trusting people, though you can't say why. Maybe you pull away when things get too good, too safe, too real. Or maybe you overachieve, exhaust yourself, try to control everything. Because a part of you learned long ago that chaos can be kept at bay if you just do everything right. That's what emotional shock does. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers through your hyper-independence, through the way you tense up when someone gets too close, through the smile you wear when you feel like crying. The invisible wound shapes how you love, how you protect yourself, how you see the world. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this is how emotional shock works. It lodges itself in the unconscious. It becomes part of the silent architecture of your identity. And over time, you begin to live around it. You avoid the things that poke at it. You numb the feelings that try to rise from it. You become someone who's learned how to survive without ever really healing. But the wound is still there, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And because you didn't get what you needed in the moment the shock first happened. Safety, connection, space to feel. So the body holds it, the psyche holds it, and the self begins to adapt. This adaptation often comes with symptoms we don't connect to the original wound. Chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, difficulty sleeping, emotional numbness, a sense of never feeling fully here. You think something is wrong with you. You think you're broken. But Jung would say, the wound is not the enemy. The wound is the place where healing wants to begin. He once observed that the wound is the place where the soul gets in. And maybe that's why we're forced to meet it, not with logic or explanation, but with compassion. The invisible wound doesn't respond to judgment. It doesn't heal through force. It responds to being seen, acknowledged, and gently held. But that's hard, because most of us were never taught how to sit with pain that can't be fixed. We want to intellectualize it. We want to skip to the lesson. But emotional shock doesn't come with a manual. It isn't solved. It's metabolized, slowly, somatically, with presence. And that's where Jung's work with the shadow becomes so important, because often the wound lives in the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it's unacceptable in the eyes of our persona. It doesn't fit the mask. It's the anger we were told not to feel, the grief we didn't have permission to show, the weakness we were taught to fear. The wound gets pushed into the dark, and there it festers. But Jung knew that the only way to heal was to turn toward it, not to be consumed by it, but to integrate it, to reclaim the parts of us that were pushed away, to say, yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was overwhelmed. Yes, something broke inside me. And I am still here. That simple recognition that something happened to you that matters is where healing begins. And when you begin to honor that wound instead of hiding it, something shifts. You start to feel more whole. You stop living split in two. The person the world sees, and the person quietly suffering inside. You begin to live from a place of truth. And even though it's vulnerable, it's also freeing, because you're no longer pretending that pain didn't happen. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness is your pain, your trauma, your shock. And when you bring it into the light, not all at once, but piece by piece, it begins to loosen its grip. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're carrying something heavy that was never given the space to be felt. And by choosing to turn inward, by choosing to see the invisible wound, you are not falling apart. You are healing in the only way that truly works, from the inside out. This part of the journey is quiet. There are no trophies, no applause, just you, sitting with your truth. And for many people, that's the bravest thing they'll ever do. At some point in the healing journey, something inside you stirs. Not a scream, not a cry for help, but a whisper. A gentle, persistent voice that says, "There's more to me than this pain." That whisper is the beginning of shadow work. The moment you stop running from your emotional shock and start turning toward it, not to fix it, not to erase it, but to understand it, to listen to it, to meet it with honesty. Carl Jung believed that real healing begins the moment we become curious about our darkness, not afraid of it, not ashamed of it, but open to what it might be trying to teach us. He said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's what shadow work really is. It's the radical act of not abandoning yourself in your most fragile, most chaotic, most misunderstood states. When emotional shock hits, it often cracks open a door to the shadow. Suddenly, you're face to face with parts of yourself you never wanted to meet. Rage you thought you didn't have, grief you didn't know was buried that deep, fears that make no logical sense but feel completely real. The impulse is to close the door, to patch yourself up, to get back to normal. But what if that version of normal was never really you? What if the emotional shock didn't break you, but freed you from an identity that wasn't yours to carry? The shadow isn't evil. It's not the enemy. It's made up of everything you've disowned in order to be loved. Your messiness, your intensity, your insecurities, your unmet needs. Jung called it the hidden side of the personality, and he warned that whatever we don't bring to light will continue to control us from the dark. So this is where shadow work begins, with the courage to stay. Stay present. Stay honest. Stay soft. To sit with the ache instead of silencing it. To feel the rage without acting it out, to witness your anxiety without collapsing into it. It's not glamorous. It's not something you post about. It's private, sacred work. It's you. Learning to love the parts of yourself you were taught to reject. And it's hard, because we live in a world that rewards performance, not presence, that celebrates strength, not softness, that tells you to move on, toughen up, stay busy. But shadow work asks you to slow down, to listen, to feel what you've been too scared to feel. It's the opposite of self-improvement. It's self-return. You may find yourself crying in places you didn't expect. You may feel exhausted after doing nothing. You may start dreaming more vividly. You may become more sensitive to noise, to people, to old memories. That's not weakness. That's your nervous system thawing. That's your psyche saying, it's finally safe to feel. And yet, it can be lonely, because most people won't understand. You might look fine on the outside, but inside, you're reassembling yourself from the ground up. Shadow work isn't about becoming someone new. It's about reclaiming who you were before the world told you who to be. You'll begin to notice patterns, the way you attract the same kind of partner, the way you sabotage your own peace, the way you overgive and then resent it. These aren't flaws. These are footprints leading back to the original wound, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what makes this work so uncomfortable, but also so liberating. Jung believed that integration, not perfection, is the goal of healing. He said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." That means you're not trying to be good. You're trying to be whole. And wholeness includes your anger, your grief, your shame, your joy, your fear, your hope. All of it belongs. There's no step-by-step manual for this. There's no final destination. Shadow work is circular, spiral-like. You'll revisit old wounds with new awareness. You'll return to the same feelings and find they've softened. You'll see how far you've come, not because you're always happy, but because you're no longer hiding. And with time, you begin to develop something Jung called the inner witness, a deeper part of you that watches with compassion. It's the part of you that says, yes, this is painful, but I'm here now. It's what transforms pain into wisdom. And it's what allows you to stop reacting and start responding, not from the mask, but from the soul. So if you're here, if you're sitting in the middle of your emotional shock, feeling raw and exposed, and unsure of who you are. You're not broken. You're brave. You're on the path that leads to depth, to wholeness, to truth. And yes, it's messy. Yes, it's slow. But it's real. And real is what you've been searching for all along. At the heart of every emotional shock is a collapse of the ego. And that is terrifying. The ego wants control. It wants predictability. It wants to believe it knows who it is. But emotional shock exposes the illusion. It shows us how fragile the ego's identity truly is. And yet, Jung would say this collapse is not the end. It is the start of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. In his words, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Emotional shock pushes us to strip away the false identities, the borrowed beliefs, the roles we never questioned. There is grief in this process, a kind of death, but also a rebirth. Something deeper begins to stir. The self, the central organizing principle of your psyche, begins to emerge. The self doesn't care about appearances. It seeks authenticity. It calls you home. To walk this path, you must let go of who you thought you had to be. You must listen to the quiet wisdom that lives underneath the noise. You must trust that the breaking was necessary. When the conscious mind is overwhelmed, the unconscious speaks more clearly. During times of emotional shock, many people report vivid dreams, strange symbols, recurring imagery. Jung paid close attention to these signs. Dreams are not random. They are messages. The psyche speaks in symbols. If you dream of falling, of drowning, of being lost, you're not just dreaming. You're being shown what the soul is experiencing. Jung believed that engaging with these dreams, writing them down, reflecting on their meaning, can help us process emotional shock in ways that talking cannot. The unconscious is trying to help. But we must be willing to listen. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do after emotional shock is to pay attention to the images that surface in your sleep. They often carry what the ego cannot yet accept. The path forward isn't about picking one side of yourself over another. It's about integration. Jung's concept of the transcendent function describes the capacity to hold opposing forces within us without being torn apart, to sit with sorrow and hope, with fear and love, with what was and what is becoming. Emotional shock demands this kind of holding. It tears us into fragments, but those fragments are not lost. They are waiting to be integrated. This work takes time. It's not about fixing the pain. It's about giving it space to breathe. Practices like journaling, active imagination, and therapy can help facilitate this inner dialogue. But the real healing comes when you stop trying to escape the pain and begin to hear what it's trying to tell you. Meaning doesn't erase suffering, but it transforms it. Jung, like Viktor Frankl, believed that when we can find purpose in our pain, we move from victims to participants in our own transformation. He said, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." Emotional shock often redirects our lives. It cracks open the heart, and something more honest spills out. Maybe you begin to create, or to speak the truth, or to finally rest. The pain becomes the compass. The meaning emerges from your willingness to walk through it. The goal is not perfection. It's wholeness. It's being able to say, "This happened. It broke me. And now I know myself more deeply than ever before." Emotional shock feels like devastation, but in the language of the soul, it is often an initiation. It strips away the false, reveals the buried, and awakens the deep. Carl Jung didn't promise ease, but he offered depth. He offered a path through the chaos into wholeness. In your most broken moments, he would remind you, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. I hope this video was helpful. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts or experiences. Thanks for watching.